Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Conversation Design Podcast by Bot Society, where we interview designers and developers and ask them questions about conversation design, creativity, and more. My name is Monica. I'm a product manager at Bot Society, and I will be your host today. Hi, listeners. Before we begin, we know no words will do justice to everyone's individual experience over the last weeks. All of us at Bot Society feel the responsibility to the design community, particularly right now. Whether you're a new listener or one who's been with us since the beginning, thank you for listening, and we hope that you and your families are staying safe. While this episode was to be released in a few weeks, we're releasing it early as a small act to help those looking to learn more about conversation design during this time. If you're working on projects related to COVID-19, please let us know. We'll do anything we can do to help out. We're profoundly grateful for all that you're doing. Now, on with the episode. On this episode, I interviewed Jess Thornhill, head of game user experience at Volley, a game design agency known for its successful games on Alexa and Google Assistant, including Song Quiz, Alexa's #1 game. In the interview, Jess and I talk about designing voice games and creating award-winning Alexa skills in Google Apps. Dig into her experience in voice experiences creation that dates back to 2016 and analyze the rise of speech technology in gaming. Hope you enjoy. Hi, Jess. Thanks for being with us today on the Conversation Design Podcast by Bot Society.
Thanks so much for having me.
So tell us more about your role at Volley as head of games user experience. What does the role entail?
It's actually a super interesting role. I think at Volley, we call things user experience, but actually we mean something much broader than that. So looking after the user experience of our games doesn't just mean like traditional UX. It's a lot of product management. So looking at our games and deciding what new features to build and also what new games to build. There's also project management and making sure everything's running smoothly. And then the more traditional things like designing conversation flows, running user testing and user research. What else? There's also bits of content design. So a lot of our games are very content heavy. So writing content, sourcing content for those as well.
Awesome. So tell us more about Volley and how you got to this role there.
So Volley are a voice entertainment company. We build not just games, but stories, media, and well-being products as well, specifically for voice. So for Amazon Alexa, Google Home, and more recently, Samsung Bixby as well. So I originally am from London, if you can't tell by the accent. I was working at a startup called Apollo, who also in the sort of Alexa voice space. Yes, I worked with them for a bit and went to Y Combinator with them back in 2017. Yeah, that was the big start to I'd say my career within the voice industry. And then since then, I've worked in a couple other companies as well, designing voice experiences. And then more recently, I sort of was in San Francisco and came across the guys at Volley, and we had some mutual connections in the space. And yeah, one thing just sort of led to another, and it seemed like a really exciting opportunity. So here I am.
Awesome. What did you expect your role at Volley to be like compared to your previous experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the previous roles I'd had in voice had been much more on the design side because often they were more early stage. So a lot of the work was designing conversations from scratch and coming up with voice experiences completely from scratch. And I do a lot of that here too, but there is also more management to the role. So one thing I'd say is we're very analytics driven and we care a lot about the data that we collect from our users. And I think that's a great thing to be doing and it makes a really big difference. So I'd say that's a much bigger part of my role that I wasn't really expecting. It's incredibly valuable. So I'm glad we do it.
And maybe that's part of your secret formula at Volley. So Song Quiz is one of your games, and Song Quiz is Alexa's #1 rated game for anyone that hasn't played it. Please share more about what makes Volley's game so successful.
Well, I think one of the things that makes Song Quiz so successful is just that at its heart, it's a very simple game and it's one that people recognize. So it's a simple, basically name that tune. So we'll play a little song clip and you guess the song title or artist. And it's something that can be played in groups or by yourself. So it's a very social game. And I think that really helps us because a lot of people have their smart speaker devices in their living rooms, in their kitchens, and they're really interacting with their families. And this is a great way to bring your family together and bring your friends together. And I think we really put the effort in to make sure that we are not just we're continually updating the game. So we're not just leaving it rot. I think a lot of Alexa developers, especially in the past, they would sort of build games. I mean, I did this too. You'd build a game, you'd release it, and then maybe you just lose interest, or you might not be persistent enough with sort of trying to get traction on your game, and then you just sort of abandon it. But one thing that we really do is we make sure that we are improving our games just as much as we're coming up with new ones. So we're constantly sort of releasing new content, and now we have like featured playlists every month, which is seasonal. So for example, we had a love songs playlist in February for Valentine's Day. Actually, yesterday for April Fool's Day, we released an April Fool's Day playlist for one day only. That was basically each member of the team singing a song incredibly badly. But yeah, we put a lot of time and work and research into making sure that our games sort of bring joy to people and continue to bring joy.
That's very impressive because it takes a lot of hard and consistent work to make that happen. And I like that you make everything very relatable to the current moment. In light of what's been happening these weeks, I wanted to ask you about how the situation of everyone staying at home and either working from home or children staying at home, has this affected your games at all? Since, like, as you said, you are focusing on creating this unity and bringing people together through content that brings them joy.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of other voice developers are seeing this too, but definitely we're seeing an increase in usage across all of our games, simply because everyone's at home and they're bored and they're trying to come up with things to do so they don't kill each other and their families. So yeah, all of our games right now are definitely seeing increased usage, and I definitely would say, obviously, the situation we're in right now is pretty scary and really difficult, but we are really proud to be able to sort of give people a moment of like relief and joy if they're playing our games and having some fun, to sort of help distract them from the situation outside. So yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for doing your part in this. So focusing more on specific like voice game design and conversational design now, how does your design team imagine a conversation in a game?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what kind of game. I think we tend to start with the sort of game format before we even think about the conversation. I think the more traditional game on voice is often just a trivia game, or it's very sort of turn-taking game. So for example, games like Song Quiz, you hear something, you answer a question, you hear something, you answer a question. And equally with games we have such as Yes, Sire, it's all very quick in terms of their interaction. So you get asked a question, you say yes or no, and it just keeps going and you can only say yes or no. Those are like sort of the most common games you see, but we're really trying to explore other types of game, and that really makes designing a conversation much more intriguing. So for example, we released a game called Popcorn Tycoon, which is more of, it's not a trivia game in any sense. It's way more like an idle game. So you're basically in charge of a popcorn empire, and your goal is to pop as many popcorn as you can, but you're not actively doing that. It's sort of doing it in the background, and you can basically keep the game running for as long as you want and just amass millions of popcorn, which you can use to buy more equipment to make popcorn faster. And there's lots of really cool, surprising sort of elements in the game. But with games like that, I think that's where conversation design becomes way more interesting, because it isn't just a question and answer scenario. It's how do you provide interesting content and actually allow the user to interact whenever they feel like it. So the way that game is set up, you are always popping popcorn, and you can decide when you want to go to the store and basically buy more equipment. And we give you opportunities to interact with different characters, but you don't have to do that. It's completely up to you. And I think that's something that we haven't really seen before in voice games. And it really sort of takes the idea of conversation design to another place, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. So you control all of this and your actions by voice?
Yeah, so it's basically, we use Alexa's audio player. So there's always sound going on, and we have some incredible sound design that sort of layers up with the more complexities of the game. So the more equipment you have. So for example, if you bought a hairdryer or a microwave, you start hearing the sounds of a hairdryer or a microwave in the background as you're popping. And the idea is that if it's always running like an idle clicker game, you can interrupt whenever you want and take action. But we are not always giving you the question to answer. It's more like we just sort of tell you what you can do, and then it's completely up to you. And I think that sort of autonomy is something that we'll see more, not just in sort of game conversation design, but just in more general conversation design.
Yeah, for sure. And as the capabilities of these devices like Alexa and the Google Assistant, like the different hardware pieces that they have expands, I think there will be a lot more opportunities for more advanced skills and games like this.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you start designing a conversational game from scratch?
I'd say my process has changed over the last couple of years. Definitely, when I first started out, it was very much using flow diagrams and sort of trees to help visualize what things look like. So you'd be able to just start in one place, you'd see where you went, what path you went down if you chose a particular option. But I think that still is extremely useful for certain games, and definitely some of our choose your own adventure games that we produce at Volley as well. And that's a really useful way of thinking about the user experience and the conversation. But more recently, I have sort of moved away from that because it also is quite constricting, because it just assumes that there is only one tree diagram that a user can take, when in fact a user can say whatever they want. And I think that doesn't always best cover that concept. More recently, I will start with like a script, more writing out the conversation, just script style. And that would just be like the most ideal conversation and the happy path. And then so I just write several scripts that will sort of address every possible scenario. I also switched to this method because I just find that some engineers also help. They also sort of visualize conversations in this way as well. So it makes it much easier to work with engineers, because I think that for some, going through a really complex tree diagram, which spans like 10 pages, can get a bit unwieldy for everyone. So yeah, I tend to start with scripts, go from there. And I think it's much easier for me to actually think about it this way, because then you can think, oh, but what if a user says this and you've not got any space for that in your tree diagram? This means you can just have like all the separate conversations, and then you can also just see how they sort of connect together as well.
Yeah, for sure. And that actually reminds me of part of how I do my job as a product manager, working with engineers. A lot of it is defining these user flows, that if a user does this, like we need to make sure that we do know what the next action is. It's always fun to find these parallels between different different. So do you prototype the gaming interactions with any like voice user interface?
It depends on the stage of the game and the size of what we're building. So if it is a simple change to an existing game, so maybe just word changes or adding a couple extra little things, then probably don't prototype it that heavily. But if it is a brand new game, we will tend to make an MVP. Prototyping is obviously extremely useful. And also I run user testing all the time, and prototypes is super helpful for that as well, just to get people to come in and test a very specific part of an experience.
So getting more into testing, how do you test your games or have people in to test your games?
Yeah, so one thing that I really sort of push for, and I hope that everyone is doing this, and I think it's funny because it's not a new concept at all, sort of the idea of like in-house user testing. But I think it's one that's taking its time to get into sort of the voice space. Obviously, mobile apps and websites have been using user testing for decades, but I think voice companies need to be doing this as much. So we will bring in people to the office. I will sort of sit them down, give them something to test and have questions, and it takes about 30 minutes per person. We pay them for their time and then we see what we find. And I think data is obviously incredibly important, but there are so many little things that you just cannot learn from the data that we didn't see until we had people in. And also I think the problem is when you're working on your own games, you get so used to them and all their little intricacies, you forget that other people, one, have never played your game before, but two, also just might be brand new to Alexa itself. I think it's getting, or Google, I think it's getting better now, but I remember a couple of years ago, it was really easy to forget that some people just don't even know how to use their device. So it's sometimes people or developers expect a lot from their users, who are just sort of just navigating the platform, let alone your experience. So yeah, we've learned a ton from just actually user testing, and it's little things as well, like just watching someone respond to a question and seeing how long it takes them to respond. If you see that they're hesitating, it means that you've probably not phrased the question as well as you could because they are thinking about how to answer. So yeah, there's just so many lessons to be learned from watching people.
Yeah. Going more into what you said, how some users are just trying to figure out how to use their devices versus some users are more like power users. Do you do any user segmenting when you're doing testing or when you come up with an idea for a game?
So most of our testing is done on brand new users. I tend to recruit users who have not played our games before, but have had some experience with the device, just so we don't have to like explain the devices. And I think that sort of best fits the people that we're sort of giving our experiences to. Yeah, when it comes to actually building the experience, we do make sure that the experience for a first-time user is different to one who's more experienced, just in terms of the game experience itself. So if you are brand new to our game, we explain everything. We try and be as clear as possible. We will repeat things if we need to. Everything is sort of structured in a way to help you understand it. But as you return to the game more and more, we sort of strip away a lot of the instructions because we believe that by now you should you hopefully know how to play. And instead of being helpful, the instructions are just sort of slow you down and sort of take longer to get to the experience that you want to go to. We treat our existing users maturely and not like children that need to have their hands held. But then with first-time users, we do make sure that you know exactly what you're doing because we want to make you enjoy your experience and we want you to come back, of course.
And I'm sure you collect data, as you said, about like all of these games. So can you tell us more about how you make iterations on the games? How often do you make iterations? How do you decide what to change?
We make changes on our more popular games all the time, like pretty much on a weekly basis. And it is based, we have certain metrics that are very important to us. Things like sort of your funnel. So if you start a game, how many people finish the game? And things like that are really important to us. And sort of surface ideas for tests that might be beneficial or not. So for example, if say your game had like 10 questions, but you noticed that your funnel was sort of dipping around question 8, then that might suggest to you, oh, maybe we should have a test that the game only has sort of 8 questions and see if people feel better. We definitely run a lot of tests like that. And if we add any new features or any new content ideas, I think the benefit of having so many users is that you can see the results of a test pretty quickly. So we know within a day probably whether that was a good idea or not. And sometimes they're not good ideas. Others, you can change your word and you see a massive change within sort of a day or two. So yeah, our data helps us basically test really vigorously.
Yeah, it's always very satisfying when you run a test and then in a day you see this major result.
Right, yeah.
We relate with that. How do you manage expectations in a game? I think a lot of conversational designers talk a lot about managing expectations for assistants. I'm wondering how this plays into what users expect the game can do versus not.
That's a really good question. It's a fine line because you want to manage their expectations well so that they have experience, that they know what experience they're getting in for, and they're not disappointed by asking for something they can't do. But equally, I tend not to like experiences that sort of instruct users as to what they can say, but just because it doesn't feel that natural in terms of a conversation. Like I wouldn't say to you, like, how are you today? You can say, fine, not bad, very good. And it gets tricky with games because even simple things like for some of our games, you can choose how many people are playing. We want to make sure that they know that we have a limit of 4. We do have to set expectations, but I think we focus mainly on first-time users just to sort of make sure they know how to play the game. It's tough to get the balance between making sure they know what they're doing and setting their expectations, but also not sort of like providing them with a really boring experience where we're just like dictating what they can say and what they can't say. I think the best way to sort of deal with this is just to have really good like fallback management. So we have tested more open-ended questions, but we just need to make sure all the time that if they're saying something that we didn't expect, that we sort of quickly update our interaction model to allow for people to say other things in the future, even if it's something, and that could be something that we haven't sort of built yet. So for example, if we asked someone what music they wanted to play in Song Quiz and they named a genre or sort of a playlist that we don't have yet, it's about like having the fallback to say, oh, we don't have that yet, but come back soon, we'll have it soon, rather than just saying, I didn't understand that. You can say these options and these options only.
That's great. What are some of your tips for voice app discoverability?
I feel like this is quite a contentious issue. And I know people have been sort of complaining about this since day one. And I think I wrote a blog post about how hard it is back in 2016 or 2017. And I don't know if it's got easier or harder. I think both. It's easier in terms of discoverability because just more people are using their devices and more people are increasingly learning what the capabilities of their smart speaker devices are. I think we're still in this stage where users are very loyal to their speaker as a music player and as a stupid question answer or just as like a timer. But I definitely believe that more and more users are understanding what else they can do. And I think Amazon's doing a pretty good job trying to also educate their users in terms of what they can do with their speakers. So on the one hand, it's getting easier to discover things because Amazon are really helping out by recommending things all the time, by suggesting new experiences after you've played one. So after you play one game, often Alexa will recommend another game. So if you're an upcoming developer and you're sort of in that algorithm, then Amazon's doing a lot of the work for you. And it's just saying, oh, why don't you play this other game that you might not have heard before, which is great. But yeah, it is still difficult just because advertising is hard. No one really uses the Alexa app. And so it's just difficult to see what's out there. It's not like you can just go to your app store or your Play Store and you can browse through the different skills. I mean, you can do that on Alexa, but I doubt that many people are really discovering things that way. But I think there's still hope for more traditional sort of channels like email marketing, advertising, social media advertising. I think a lot of people do try that and they do have some success. So yeah, I think if you're like sort of new in the space and trying to get your new app out there, like it's not impossible, but you do have to stay persistent. And the other thing that also really helps is reviews. So if you can get reviews for your skill, that just helps increase its visibility to others. And so yeah, I would definitely say get reviews if you can.
Yeah. As for how you do it at Volley, do you rely more on these traditional channels like email, like you said, or is it more like because you've established like popularity with a couple of different games, Alexa's recommendation service, like optimizes your other games usage?
I will say that there is a benefit to having been early in the space. So we've had a lot of time to build a lot of views and a lot of loyalty with people. So that's definitely helped us. But we do still experiment all the time with different ways of improving our discoverability. So we send emails, we've tried ads, like we try not to be reliant on sort of one particular method, whether that's Amazon's recommendation engine or something else.
Awesome. So until now, we've talked about kind of all aspects of starting to design a game, the content that goes in it, launching it, marketing it, dealing with discoverability, testing, all of this. It does sound like a lot of work, which it is. So I'm curious, what's your design process with your team and who is the team made of so that all of these tasks get done to produce successful skills?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it can sound probably like it's very messy at times. But so Volley split up into three sort of main areas, and games is only one of them. But that's where I sit. So in terms of the games team, we are a mixture of engineers and user experience plus product people, and also designers and data. And we'll just work together to make sure that we're all collaborating on games. So if we have a new game idea, we'll sort of form a smaller team with at least one engineer and at least one design / product / user experience. I think one thing to sort of emphasize is that everyone in our team is very multi-talented and we all sort of wear different hats at several times. So our engineers are very product focused and our product people are often also engineers and or designers and or data people too. Mm-hmm. So we don't really have there's no one in the company that is just a conversation designer, because everyone's role is just way bigger than that. And I think that's also the benefit of being in a small team, that you can just really sort of do several things. And if you have several different skills, you get to use all of them. So yeah, one good example is our head of data is also an incredible sound engineer. Mm-hmm. So, and also a great content producer too. So he played a huge role in Popcorn Tycoon, designing all the sound and also looking at the analytics. So yeah, in terms of our process, it depends on the game and what we're trying to achieve and what stage the game is. But there's always like a small team with a mixture of people that wear different hats that sort of get together, and we work together throughout the whole process. So it's not the case that a product, we don't just have like product managers that scope out things and just hand them off to engineers and never talk to them again. It's all done sort of collaboratively.
That's awesome. Love to hear that. And you're definitely a very lucky team to have all those talented people in it. What skills besides like one's area of focus, of course, which can be, someone's a designer, what skills overall are good to have in voice game design?
I think good attention to detail is pretty key, and just also wanting to look at details. I think conversation is just so interesting and also so intricate. And I think it's very easy to look at a conversation and think, oh, that's easy. Like that anyone can write a conversation because you have conversations all the time. I speak every day, right? But I think is one thing to speak and another thing to really understand how conversation is made up. So I think to be a good voice designer, you have to really look at how people speak and how they interact. And it's really small things that you might not think about in day-to-day life, but when you come to write conversation, they're like incredibly important. So for example, just tiny things like if you're listing options to people, they're most likely to remember the last thing that you said to them rather than the first. So if you're giving people options and you wonder why the final option is so popular, and it might not be because of the option, it might just be because that's what they remember. It's tiny things like that. So I think if you've just got a good attention to detail and sort of quite thorough and fascinated by how people interact, then those are all really great skills to sort of set you up to being a good voice designer.
Perfect. I hope everyone's keeping track of all this. So you talked about how your team works very closely together. And now that we're all working remotely, a lot of teams are having to review and change their processes and how they work. I'm curious, have your team processes changed now that your team is working remotely, or what does that look like in the office versus outside of it?
I'll say that I'm finding it very difficult to work from home. We don't really work remotely that often. And I think it's mainly because we're such a small team and we all work together so much that it's quite hard when people are remote. It's definitely been a really steep learning curve for us to go from 100% in the office to suddenly 100% dispersed around the Bay Area / the country. Zoom, of course, has become a staple to all of our lives. And I think one really important thing was we were very lucky to have sort of stepped up our organization levels in terms of how well we document things. And we actually sort of migrated to Notion right before this all happened. And I think that was a really great move because it's really saved us, because now we have really clear documentation on everything that we're doing and everyone knows where to go to find their documents. And I think that just makes it one step easier now that we're not in the same room. So I think, just making sure that everything online is as easy as possible to access and to discuss has just really helped us. And in terms of everything else, I think not much has changed in any other way. We still have our happy hours, but they're just on Zoom now, which I realized apparently everyone is doing. I thought we were original. Yeah, just a lot of meeting when we need to discuss something, making sure we're staying in contact with each other, but also just being respectful of people's time and making sure that everyone has what they need, because I think this is a really difficult time for everyone. So we do check in on each other all the time just to make sure we're surviving and we're doing okay. So we care a lot about our team morale, and I think that's also been a really important thing to focus on during this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've noticed it's been, like you said, a really important thing to focus on. And for those that don't know, we're a pretty small team at Bot Society, but we're spread between San Francisco and Milan, Italy. So it's been pretty crucial to be intentional about catching up with team members and making sure we're all on the same page. And we do check in on how everyone is doing more than maybe on an ordinary day in January.
Definitely agree with that.
Yeah. The next question, maybe, I don't know how much your answer would have changed, but I have a feeling now we're thinking about entertainment more, just as people have limited entertainment options. What do you think is the role of games in people's lives, and how does that affect your design decisions?
That's such a good question. Yeah, I do think it's changed, or it's just become slightly more important during this time because people have more free time. But I think we always think of it as how can we bring joy to people in any way. So with our games, it's how can we bring sort of joy and entertainment with our games, and how can people have a good time by themselves or with their families. And then with our other sort of media products and well-being, it's how can we bring a joy in sort of a different sense and sort of more of a personal joy. But yeah, with our games, also one thing we do always think about is the role is different for different people, and a context is so important to us. So not everyone is playing our games with 100% concentration or with like that being the center of their night. Obviously, we'd love if everyone sort of centered their evening around Song Quiz, but that's definitely not the case. And we've done a lot of research, and a lot of our users, and I think this is true across a lot of, if not all, voice experiences, a lot of our users are always multitasking when they're interacting with our games. So they might just be washing up or cooking dinner or just doing chores or housework, and then just using their smart speaker as a way to pass the time. And I think understanding that context is really important, because it means that you have to make sure even more that your game is easy to understand, because you cannot assume that people are 100% focused on it. It's like Netflix shows when you're also scrolling on Instagram, right? You're not really focused on it. And I think that's the case with voice a lot, just because it's just so easy to chat with whilst you're doing other things. Yeah, I think the role is different for different people, and definitely for some people, this is like a really important thing to them, and a lot of our games are a huge part of their lives, and they tell us all the time about how competitive they are and how how annoyed they get if something goes wrong, or how triumphant they feel if they beat an opponent that they were struggling to beat before, and things like that. And we love that, but also the role is not always that big for everyone, so it's important to keep that in mind.
What are the biggest constraints you see for voice game design?
I think the number one is obviously that there's no visuals. There's not always visuals, so you can't always see what's going on. I think that from the start kind of restricts the types of games that you can offer people. And that's, I think, why a lot of games have gone down the route of just trivia, where question and answer is the core sort of gameplay, just because it makes sense for a voice platform where you can't see anything. But what we're finding really interesting is more and more people are interacting with voice experiences plus visuals. So that could be an Echo Show, it could be a Google Home Hub, and also Amazon Fire TVs are getting increasingly popular. And so it kind of means the dynamic is changing and people are actually watching something whilst they're interacting with voice. And that just opens up a whole new world of potential experiences that you can make. We do see a place in a sort of time in the near future where there are just sort of visual only voice experiences, which I'm not sure we've really seen before, but I think that'd be super exciting as well. But until we get there, the lack of visuals, I believe, is one of the biggest constraints.
And I'm curious, can you tell from your end as a game developer or publisher for Alexa and Google Assistant, can you tell how many users are using it on what device?
Yeah, so Amazon and Google send over information on slightly vague information, but it tells you whether they have a smart display device or not.
Okay. Then on the other hand, what do you think makes interactive games successful?
If there's a lot of conversations, a lot of sort of turn-taking involved, I think keeping that conversation light and funny and playful is super important. Keeping your instructions as concise as possible, but also as relevant and easy to understand as they can be. We experiment all the time with our instructions because it's one of those things where people need to know how they're playing, how to play, but also how can you really be as short as possible, because you don't really want people listening to like a minute long essay on how to play the game. So, and one thing I think we try is to add, we love adding humor to our games, because I think especially when you're using Amazon's Alexa's voice or sort of a robotic voice, it's really important to mix it up a bit and give experiences that people might not be expecting. So a lot of our games use humor, and we have, for example, Song Quiz has some clapbacks when you answer the question correct or incorrect that people just don't see coming. So if you get a question wrong, we might say, oh, that was trash. Or if you're playing in the like 2000s decade, we say things like for shizzle. I think we added Yas Queen recently, and it's such a small thing, but it's one of those little moments of delight that we think are really important. And that's actually the thing that we'll remember. And we have so many people tweeting about playing Song Quiz and being absolutely shocked when they heard Alexa call them trash. And it's just a small thing. But yeah, I think it's really important for us that our games have an element of like humor to them.
That's great. I was going to ask what like elements would you attribute the success of your games, but I think that covers it unless you have some more like tips to share.
Yeah, I think for us, always trying to be a little bit surprising has been hugely beneficial. I think games like Song Quiz and definitely our game Popcorn Tycoon, we do throw things in there that surprise users, and just it's what becomes memorable about the game, and it just becomes less monotonous. And I think that's what really keeps people coming back.
What is your favorite voice skill or app at the moment?
I'm going to say Popcorn Tycoon, even though that's ours. But what I'm really looking for, and maybe someone will beat us to it, I don't know, maybe someone will do it, but I think now more than ever, people are looking for really social experiences. And if, everyone's having Zoom happy hours. I played Cards Against Humanity over the internet last week. We also played Zoom Mafia. I think people are playing games across the country with each other online now. And I think if there's a way for there to be a voice experience that did that and helped connect people who sort of might be missing their family or friends if they can't be with them right now, I think there is huge potential for voice to sort of fill that gap. But I haven't seen it yet, but hopefully something will come out very soon.
So the next one, this is a question that's a favorite of Vittorio, our CEO. He always wonders what music or podcast do you listen to for inspiration?
I'm not sure I would say I get inspiration directly from music or podcasts, but I do listen to music and sometimes podcasts when I work. But I find podcasts hard to listen to for most bits of the work just because I either stop concentrating on the podcast or I stop concentrating on the work. So. But I do normally love to listen to podcasts. And then it's kind of the same with music. I tend to go for something like chill that is not too distracting, unless I'm on a deadline and then I need some hardcore encouraging music to sort of push me, to keep me going.
Awesome. So on the Conversation Design podcast, we take in some questions from the audience, and to not keep this going for too long, I selected one. So Benjamin from Conch Design asked what considerations are most important for games that are voice and audio first.
I think that's a really good question. I think I've said bits already, but I think the key part of a voice first, I really don't, it's not my favorite term, but I think what's really important for a voice first game is just making sure a user knows where they're going and what they can do. And particularly when they first arrive to your experience, the fact that a user can say anything in a voice experience is a really tricky challenge. And it's not like a website or a mobile app where you can just give them a menu and they just know that they can look at the menu, click the button and see where it takes them. Like they can literally do whatever they want with a game experience or a voice experience. So making sure you sort of set out the guidelines or sort of just like I want to say barrier, but not the barrier, like just the arena of what they can accomplish in this game, and also sort of give them an idea of what they can achieve with the game, so how they might feel by the end of it. And I think just setting them up at the beginning is super important. And then I don't like to say like holding their hand through the process, but definitely there is an element of just making sure that they know what they're doing, and you reward them for completing whatever it is you want them to do. So if that's a game and they get through the end, even if they lose, like they should feel good in some way that they've finished it, because even if they've lost the game, if they felt good, they might want to play again and see if they win that time. So yeah, I think just making users aware of what they can do and making them sort of know when they've done something good is really important.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jess. We've reached the end of this interview. I hope that everyone is staying safe and staying in touch with your loved ones. As we said, through Zoom, through different programs, games, trying to find ways to keep living our normal lives during this time. Thanks so much for being with us, Jess, and sharing all of this. I want everyone to go and try the Volley games now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been super fun. So yeah, happy to be here.
Bye. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
That's all for this episode. We hope you liked it. Subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening to this episode. We will continue to interview people in the chat and voice spaces in different fields. Know someone who could be a good fit or have a topic request? Let us know at info@botsociety.io or at BotSociety on any social media. Bot Society is a conversational design tool. With Bot Society, you can design voice and chatbot interactions in the same way you design apps and websites with Sketch or Figma. We have a free plan. Check it out on botsociety.io.